Welcome to New England Authors with Kameel Nasr, where we explore the wonderful stories and the depth of our region. Today we have a wonderful writer with us, Edith Maxwell. Welcome, Edith.
Thank you.
You write Quaker mysteries, right, that takes place back in the last centuries. Are you a Quaker?
I am.
You go to a meeting?
I've been a member of Amesbury Friends meeting for almost 30 years.
Oh, really?
Yes, yeah.
And what the person, your protagonist in this book, this is the latest book, Turning the Tide, just came out. You have two other Quaker mysteries. One is called Delivering the Truth, which was a very interesting book. And it features a midwife, like in Delivering, yes. Tell me, how did you come up with her? Her name is Rose, right?
Her name is Rose Carroll.
Yeah.
I live in Amesbury, and I read a news article about the Great Fire of 1888 that burned down many of the carriage factories.
Right.
And Amesbury was world-renowned for its carriages. And I got a story in my head about a Quaker mill girl who solved the mystery of the arson of the Great Fire. Historically, it wasn't arson, but I was writing fiction. And I wrote a short story that was then published in Best New England Crime Fiction of that next year, 2014, I think.
Yeah.
And the characters and setting didn't want to go away. So I added her Aunt Rose,
yeah,
the midwife, and she goes around town doing prenatal visits and delivering babies, and she hears secrets that women tell during labor.
Yeah.
And she's a good amateur sleuth because she's a bit of an outsider. She's a Quaker.
Right.
She didn't grow up in Amesbury. She grew up in Lawrence. And she goes places the police can never go. She goes into women's bedrooms.
Yeah. This book takes place in 1888, right? During that was an election year.
That was a presidential election.
We're going to go into that in a little bit. But I just wondered, can you just fill us in on the Quaker movement history in New England? We know it started in England in the 1600s. We know about William Penn coming over to Pennsylvania. How did it spread to New England?
Oh, it spread to New England very early.
Yeah.
George Fox and Margaret Fell Fox were the founders in England around 1650. And
just after William Penn arrived in Pennsylvania.
In fact, he was a convert. Well, everyone was a convert at the time,
yes,
I guess.
Yeah.
And no, Quakers were very strong all over New England. And then the Puritans got very upset because they weren't following the rules.
Right.
The men weren't doffing their hats. No one was using titles. And so they kicked them out. They sent them to Rhode Island. People came back. Mary Dyer was hanged in Boston for being a Quaker. Oh, really? There's a statue of Mary Dyer outside the State House.
Oh, interesting.
That's right.
Now, Quaker was a derogatory term. Yes?
It's the religious society of friends.
Yeah.
And they were so fervent that they would sometimes quake in their preaching. Yeah. And so people called them Quakers.
And they adopted the name.
Well, it's still the outsider name for us, but we are the Religious Society of Friends.
Yes.
But people know us as Quakers.
Right, right. Now, tell us about your book. It takes place around the suffrage movement.
That's right.
I had so many questions about this suffrage movement, but tell us a little. It starts off with a meeting.
It starts off with a meeting of the Amesbury Women's Suffrage Association. I placed it at that time of year almost accidentally. The first book, Delivering the Truth, takes place in April. The second book starts on the 4th of July in Amesbury. And I moved the book along sort of 3 or 4 months, and I thought, oh, what was going on in November? Oh, it was an election year.
Yes.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. So then it opens at the meeting of the Amesbury Women's Suffrage Association. I don't know that there was one historically, but there might have been.
Yeah.
And Elizabeth Cady Stanton comes to town to rally the troops.
Right, right.
They're planning a protest across the street from the polls on election morning.
Yes, she was one of the, if not the founder of the suffrage movement, certainly one of the...
She was one of the activists. She was actually one of the few women who were not Quakers Quaker women were in the forefront.
Quaker women were in the forefront of both the abolitionist movement and the suffrage movement.
Right. Yeah, that's right.
Were they always anti-war? Were Quakers?
Yes. So it's always been the core philosophy of being a friend, capital F, is that we all have that of God in us. Yes. And so we are all equal in God's eyes.
Men and women.
Men and women, blacks and whites. And so they were in the forefront of the abolitionist movement. They were in the forefront of the suffrage movement.
Now, to Puritans, this would have been very heretical.
Oh, very heretical.
Yeah.
And so, because we are all equal, men would not doff their hats to the mayor or the whoever. They spoke using the familiar form, thee and thy, even when other people were using more honorific forms. And so they were threatening to the establishment.
Yeah. So what happens at the meeting? There is somebody who speaks, right? There's a wonderful atmosphere you give about this. All the women, the smells and the sounds and the smell. Right. I love the book.
Thank you.
And then poor Rose, the midwife, she goes. Was it on her bicycle?
Yes, she
rides a bicycle, which I thought was very interesting.
And it's one of the new safety bicycles with the wheels of equal size.
Yes, and the one that we're showing now, it looks like it has wood, made out of wood.
Oh, they were made out of wood. I've seen up at Strawberry Bank in Portsmouth, which is a historical site. They have a fall fair, and there was someone there with all these vintage bicycles. I mean, really vintage. And I saw Rose's bicycle there.
Okay, so I'm a bicycle activist myself, and I want to point out that it was bicyclists who really led the way to making roads. They wanted roads.
Sure, because imagine riding on cobblestones.
Yes.
What that would do to your teeth and your back and your spine, right?
Anyway, so she's on her bicycle, and she
went to a birth. She was called to a birth overnight. Yes,
called to birth.
She's riding home at dawn, a little after it gets light, and she sees a red shoe under a bush that should not be there.
Right.
And one of the leaders of the suffrage, the Amesbury Association, was wearing red shoes the night before.
Yeah.
And that is, she finds her body.
She finds the body. And this isn't the first body she's found. She's had some experience.
She's had experiences
in finding the body.
First two books.
The crime scene was a little bit different. So the police is called. And it's a little different now. Everything is so pristine and gloves and all like that.
Yeah,
so,
I mean, they pull her out from under the bush and they turn her over and they...
And who is she?
She is Rowena Felch, who was the leader of the
suffrage
association, who was also a lawyer. And women practiced law in those times. They couldn't hold office. The only office they could hold in Massachusetts was school committee.
I was very surprised at that there were women attorneys.
Sure,
yeah?
There were doctors, there were attorneys.
There were women doctors as well.
Sure, yeah. There were medical schools.
But they couldn't vote.
But they couldn't vote.
Yeah. You also allude to a lesbian relationship. In fact, Rose suspects the murdered woman's relationship before as part of the crime.
There was another one of the suffrage activists seems overly fond of Rowena, of the victim.
Is this way before its time, or what?
I don't think so. It's just that, you couldn't practice that openly. Yeah. But there have always been gay and lesbians.
Oh, yes, I know, but
not before its time. I mean, certainly it would have to be kept hidden, although Bertie Winslow is the postmistress, and she's one of Rose's best friends in the series. And she lives in what they call a Boston marriage with her lover, Sophie.
Oh, a Boston marriage? I've never heard that expression before.
Sophie is also a lawyer. Yeah. And they call that Boston marriage to unmarried single ladies. who lived together for a long time. And some might have just been friends, and some might have been more than friends.
Now, you did a lot of research for this, right?
Yes,
you did,
a lot.
And you know New England history very well. Tell me, were the New Englanders as uptight as they were pictured to be? Does that stereotype hold any truth?
I don't know how to answer that. I'm a native Southern Californian. I'm a fourth-generation Californian.
Oh, I see.
Originally.
I see. So,
but I've now lived in Massachusetts longer than I lived in California.
What was New England like? Was it very populated? What was it like?
In the late 1800s?
Yeah, in the late 1800s.
Very populated. The mills, the industry, you know, young people were flocking to the cities to get off the farm, to work. Immigrants were coming in great waves, Irish and Polish and French Canadians. And the cities were the place of opportunity.
Mm.
Yeah.
Okay, and so one of the things I found very interesting is that the Quakers were not allowed to marry outside their religion.
So that was a custom established to not dilute the faith when they were first coming to this country, when they were so persecuted by the Puritans.
Yeah.
And you would be read out of meeting if you married someone who wasn't a Quaker. This happened to John Greenleaf Whittier's brother Matthew, who married a non-Quaker. In Rose's day, that was starting to loosen up.
I see.
And then, of course, she's in love with a Unitarian Universalist doctor from Newburyport who is not a Quaker. And we'll see as the series goes on how that goes.
So in your book, Delivering the Truth, which is here on the screen, we meet the Quaker poet and abolitionist John Greenleaf Whittier.
Right.
Tell us a little about him.
He was a longtime resident of Amesbury. He was born in Haverhill, and then his family moved to Amesbury, and he was in the forefront of the abolition movement. He was a rock star poet. I'm a docent at the Whittier Home Museum.
Oh, I see.
It's open every Saturday until October.
Okay.
For tours, and you know, people would flock to Amesbury. Right? They didn't have radio. They didn't have social media. People would, but poetry was huge. So people would flock to Amesbury, and he was very, very well known. Remained single his whole life. And he went to the same Quaker meeting as I do and as Rose did. And so he's a sort of a mentor to her in the books.
I see, I see. We're talking with Edith Maxwell. This is New England Authors with Kameel Nasr. And the Quakers were also intent on helping Native Americans. They didn't, why did it fail? Why did they fail to do that? It was... I
haven't researched that part yet, although I'm thinking of having a Native American midwife in a future book.
Yeah.
It was, again, the same reasons they were working to free the slaves and to give women the vote. These are underrepresented, underserved, persecuted communities. Yeah. So it's no surprise that the Quakers were trying to help.
All right, so tell us a little about the other, you're a writer of many, and you even use a pen name, right?
I do.
What's the pen name?
So I write 3 or 4 series, depending on how you count them. My Local Foods Mysteries, this is the 5th book, Mulch Ado About Murder, that came out last year. It's the 5th book in this series. These are set on an organic farm in a town much like West Newbury, on the North Shore.
Yes.
And
it's all New England based.
These are New England based.
Yeah.
And then I write as the name Maddie Day.
Maddie Day, which is this one, which is just coming out now.
This will be out July 31st.
Yes.
And it's set in a country store breakfast and lunch restaurant in southern Indiana.
Right.
Where I lived. I got a PhD in Bloomington a few decades ago, and I love that part of the country.
Oh, and PhD in what discipline?
Linguistics.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Yes.
So I lived in the neighboring town of Bloomington for 5 years.
Oh, I see.
I love that part of it.
You'd have a great interest in all of the linguistic expressions.
Absolutely.
So, what's Death Over Easy? Is there a murder in it?
Oh, of course.
There's murder in every
I write
book.
murder mysteries.
Yeah,
right.
yeah.
It's the fifth book in the series. It takes place in June. There's the Bill Monroe Music Festival grounds are in Bean Blossom, which is a beautiful little town in Brown County, Indiana. Mm-hmm. And so there's the music festival's going on, the Bluegrass Festival, and one of the musicians is found dead the next morning. And my protagonist, Robbie Jordan, gets involved in solving the crime. And then there's another murder a couple days later.
I see, I see. So that's, and then you have another series as well?
I have a new series debuting in December, the Cozy Capers Book Group Mysteries, and it's set in a fictional town on Cape Cod.
Oh, I see.
And the first book is Murder on Cape Cod. It'll be out December 18th.
Murder on Cape Cod.
Also written as Maddie Day.
Why do you use a pen name?
My publisher wanted to distinguish. This is the same publisher and same editor. They're both with Kensington Press. Yeah. These two series.
Yes.
My contemporary series.
Oh, they want to distinguish.
He wanted it to look like a different author in the bookstores. Oh. And in fact, the country store mysteries are doing wildly well. They're very, very popular.
Now, you're with a writers group called Wicked.
I blog with the Wicked Cozy Authors. Thank you for asking.
Yeah, what's that about?
We have a blog. There's 6 of us, New England, who write cozy mysteries and historical mysteries, and we're branching out a bit in the kinds of books we write. And we have a number of pen names among us.
And you help each other.
We help each other. We're always behind the scenes on email talking about the publishing business and successes and failures and concerns. And
do you look at each other's work and critique that as well?
Sometimes we critique each other's work. It's a fabulous support group, and we have a blog, and we have guests on the blog, and we chime in on Wicked Wednesdays on the same topic. It's fabulous. I hope everyone will visit that.
And during the acceptance speech at the Nobel Literature Prize, Hemingway said that writing is a very lonely profession. Do you agree with that?
Most of us sit at our desks alone most of the time.
Yeah.
And so to have a group of people that I'm close to bounce ideas off of and commiserate with and share successes with, it's huge. Yeah. But I'm also a member of Sisters in Crime, which is a national organization.
Yes.
In fact, I'm president of the New England chapter.
Are you?
And it was founded more than 30 years ago by some premier female crime writers like Sarah Paretsky, Linda Barnes, who's a Boston writer, who looked around. They said, we're not getting nominated for the awards. We're not getting reviewed in the New York Times. We should do something about it. And now it's an international advocacy organization for female crime writers.
And this has changed now. Women are most authors are women, are they not? Or,
I wouldn't say most, but certainly more female authors are getting nominated, for example, for the Edgar Awards, which is the Mystery Writers of America Awards. I'm happy to say,
named after Edgar Allan Poe.
Edgar Allan Poe.
Yes.
That Delivering the Truth and Called to Justice, the first 2 books in this series, were nominated for an Agatha Award for Best Historical Mystery.
Named after Agatha Christie.
Named after Agatha Christie.
Oh, congratulations. I didn't know that.
Yeah, last year, this year and the year before.
Well, as I said, I found them really interesting, especially the historical aspect, because I love reading about history and the suffrage movement. Is there another coming out?
Yes. There'll be at least 2 more I'm under contract for. The second book is already in production. It's called Charity's Burden. It'll be out next April. Mm-hmm. So these come out on a yearly sequence. They come out every April 8th.
Featuring Rose the Midwife.
Featuring Rose Carroll.
Yeah, Rose Carroll.
And the 5th book I'm polishing now. The first draft's all done. I'm just tweaking it. And it might be called Judge Thee Not. And that's a 2020 book.
Tell me, why did you pick Midwife?
I'm not sure, but some decades ago, I had my boys, who are now around 30, were little boys, and I had a small organic farm in West Newbury. And I also taught childbirth classes to couples. And so I attended a number of births as an observer, and I started doing labor support, doula work. And so I love being back in that childbirth world again. after several decades being away from it.
Yeah.
And although I do have a practicing nurse midwife who reads the birth scenes in the books and makes sure I get it right, and so far I haven't had to change anything.
Oh, that's great. Well, Turning the Tide is about suffrage, right? And I was fascinated to read it. And in fact, I read another book about the suffrage movement, a historical book, and the women got the right to vote in 1920. Right. Which, by the way, was 4 years before Native Americans got the right to vote. Right. And it took 72 years. Yeah. Why? I have to say, I warned you that I would ask these questions.
And I thought, when I saw that question, I thought, I have no way to answer that.
Yeah.
I mean, the male establishment, the culture, the ingrained attitudes and views, change can come slowly sometimes.
Yeah.
But it came.
Yeah. So it took a awfully long time. My second question is a much more difficult one, and women got the right to vote in 1920. Now, do you agree with me that women are kinder, less warlike, more nurturing, and more justice-loving? Do you agree with me that women are better at nourishing and so on?
I think that to date that is probably generally true.
Yes.
But I will say that some of us have worked very hard to raise gentle, nurturing, peaceful sons.
Well, okay.
And I can't be more proud
yes.
of the boys I raised and that a number of my friends raised. So again, change comes slowly.
Yes, but okay, so women got the right to vote in 1920. This was going through my mind when reading your book. And I think now the majority of voters in the United States are women. Why did nothing change? We're certainly not less warlike as a country. We certainly don't have social justice anymore in this country. If anything, we're a much more masculine country than we were in 1920. Why did nothing change? I'm sorry to ask you this question, but I warned you.
I'm not a political scientist or a sociologist. I don't have an answer for that. Mm-hmm. All I can say is that it's not impossible to make change happen.
Yeah.
And so just because it takes a long time isn't a reason to give up.
No, I know nobody could answer the question, but I just wanted to put the question out there.
It's a great question. I just don't know the answer.
Okay, so let me give you a little quote here, all right, from your book. A woman should have all the opportunities, higher education, the full development of her physical and mental faculties, the most enlarged freedom of thought and action, a complete emancipation from all forms of bondage, of custom, dependence, superstition, and all the crippling influences of fear, the personal responsibility of her own life. Where does that come from?
That was Elizabeth Cady Stanton.
Yeah.
Right.
Uh-huh. And
I found a piece of writing that she had done actually a couple years later. And I have a scene in the book where she's at a salon at Bertie and Sophie, these friends of Rose's house, and she's speaking to a group of women. And I decided to put those words in her mouth in 1888, even though it was a few years early, because she was thinking about those ideas and developing them and speaking about them at the time. Yeah. And I thought, I love that. I'm going to put that in the book.
Now, there was a division in the suffrage movement with the National Women's Suffrage Association. They wanted to include the right of divorce, equality, employment, and pay. Right. And the American Women's Suffrage Association only wanted the right to vote. Did this limit their ability to function?
I think it did for a while. And I'm afraid I wrote this book 2 years ago, and I don't remember the details of how they resolved that. I think that they split and perhaps came back together in some form.
Yeah.
But sure, it was a conflict because one was a much bigger goal than the other.
Yeah.
The vote was finite, and the right to those other rights were a much more complex thing to get passed.
Okay. And what about the distinction between Democrats and Republicans? Did they have an impact on the movement?
The suffrage movement?
Yeah.
I don't know.
No.
Yeah.
So it was very interesting, you know, after the election of George Bush, a historian sent me a map of 100 years before the election map in red and blue states,
yeah.
and it was almost identical to that we have.
That we have now.
Yeah, that we have now. Yeah, yeah, interesting.
Yeah, very interesting.
Women came from all over, right? There were, and then there's a quote in the book. Women had come today from the valley, the hill, the glade, from the mansions, the tenements, the most modest homes like mine, a unifying effort. Was it that way? Was it from all classes of society that women supported the suffrage movement?
I believe so.
Yeah. And there was also a kind of dress that they wore. Right?
Well, they wore, at that period, they wore sunflower yellow sashes.
Yes.
Because the color symbolized hope.
Oh, as it does today.
As it does today.
Yeah.
You see pictures of the suffragists in the like early 1900s wearing blue, white and blue. And but my research showed that in the 1800s they were wearing sunflower yellow sashes. And they, when the book opens, they hand out one of those sashes to everybody who's going to come to the protest.
Yeah. So we're speaking with Edith Maxwell. This is New England Authors with Kameel Nasr. We have your website up on the screen. We thank you so much for being with us. We record here in Cambridge and broadcast to stations around New England. Remember, watch locally. Thank you, Edith.
Thank you so much for having me.